The storm had already taken 3 ships by midnight, and Calum Thornavale woke to find the other side of the bed cold. Rain hammered the tall windows of the ducal chambers, and the sea beyond the cliffs of Oraloon Reach roared like something alive and starving. He reached across the linen without thinking, the way a man reaches for a thing he trusts to be there, and his hand closed on nothing. Seraphine was gone. He lay still for a moment, listening. In 11 years of marriage, he had learned the sounds of his wife, the way sailors learn the moods of the tide. He knew the soft rhythm of her breathing. He knew the way she rose before dawn to walk the frost of the sky-garden terraces. He knew the quiet click of her teacup against its saucer each morning, gentle and unfailing as a chapel bell. He did not know this. He did not know why the door to the old observatory at the end of the eastern corridor stood open when it was always locked. Calum pulled on his coat and took the lantern from the hall. He told himself she was only unable to sleep. He told himself a great many reasonable things as he walked, and he believed none of them because beneath the reasonable things ran a colder current he could not name. The observatory had belonged to his grandfather, a man who had loved the stars more than he had ever loved the living. For years, Calum had thought it an empty room of dust and broken glass, a shrine to a dead man's distant heart. But as he neared the door, he heard voices, low and urgent, and one of them was hers. "You should not have come here," Seraphine said. Her voice was calm. That was the first thing that struck him, that terrible calm. "You were told never to come here." "And you were told the debt was not paid," a man answered. His accent was foreign and clipped, the sound of a country 3 borders to the east. 11 years, and still they hunt the ghost. Do you know what it is to chase a shadow for 11 years and never once touch it? Calum reached the doorway and stopped. His wife stood at the center of the room in her nightgown and a grey travelling cloak he had never seen upon her in all their years. A stranger faced her, a lean man with rain in his hair and a blade half drawn. And Seraphine, his quiet Seraphine, who blushed when courtiers praised her, and who had never once in his memory raised her voice, held the man's own pistol in her steady hand, the barrel level with his heart. "Put up the knife, Rennick," she said. "You always were slow with a blade. It is why they sent you, and not someone better." The man's mouth twisted. "The falcon speaks." The word fell into the room like a stone into still water. Calum felt it move through the whole of him. The falcon, the starlit falcon. Every soul on the continent knew that name. Kings toasted it in secret and cursed it in council. Generals had grown old chasing it. And Calum Thornavale knew it better than most, for his father had filled his boyhood with the legend of the falcon, the way other fathers filled their sons with tales of saints, and Calum had believed in it the same way, wholly, and had never once put a face to it in all his life. He must have made a sound. Both of them turned. For one heartbeat, Seraphine's composure broke, and Calum saw upon her face a thing he had never seen in 11 years, not grief, not fear, but the raw and hunted terror of a secret found. Then the stranger seized the instant, and everything happened at once. Calum shouted and hurled the lantern. Seraphine turned quickly, as spilled water, and struck the man's wrist, so that the knife spun away across the floor. The intruder grappled her. Calum crossed the room in 3 strides, tore the man off his wife, and drove him back against the great brass telescope. Glass shattered somewhere in the dark. The lantern had gutted out, and in the stormlight the 2 men fought across the ruined room, and then there was a sharp crack, and the stranger folded with a cry and went still upon the floor. Seraphine stood with the pistol smoking in her hand, the barrel angled low. "He will live," she said quietly, "which is more mercy than he came here to give." Calum stared at her. His chest heaved. Rain lashed the broken window and painted them both in silver. "Who are you?" he asked. It was the only question left standing among the ruins of everything he had believed. "Who is the woman I have called my wife?" She lowered the pistol. When she looked at him, her eyes were bright and terribly tired. The eyes of someone who has carried a weight so long she has forgotten the shape of her own shoulders without it. "Bind him," she said, "and set a watch upon him. And then, Calum, I will tell you everything." God help me. I will tell you everything at last, because I find I no longer have the strength to tell you nothing. They bound the intruder and locked him in the wine cellar under the eye of 2 household guards, whom Seraphine, to her husband's astonishment, addressed by their true names and older ranks, names that belonged to no ledger in the house. Then she led Calum back to the observatory, lit a single candle among the broken glass, and sat upon an overturned crate, as though it were a throne she had abdicated long ago, and was only now consenting to remember. "Ask," she said. "They say the Falcon ended the Salt War without a single battle," Calum said. He heard his own voice from a great distance. "They say the Falcon uncovered the poisoners in the Osier court and hanged them with their own letters. They say the Falcon turned back an army at the gates of a duchy so small the maps forget it, and vanished before the smoke had cleared." He shook his head slowly. "My father told me those tales, Seraphine. He told them to me when I was a boy who could not yet ride, and he wept telling one of them, and I never understood why. The Falcon is a legend, a story to make frightened men brave." "Legends are only secrets that have outlived their keepers," she answered. "I was born Seraphine of no great house at all. My father was a mapmaker who drank, and my mother read the stars for coins in market squares. When they died within a season of each other, I had nothing left but a good eye, a better memory, and a great deal of anger with nowhere to put it. A man named Corwin Van found me starving in a border town and taught me how to see the shape of a thing before it happened. How to read a room the way my mother read the sky." She folded her hands in her lap, and the candle threw her shadow tall upon the wall. "By 19, I had turned away a famine by moving grain no army knew existed. By 22, I had ended the Salt War by letting 2 kings each believe the other had already sued for peace. I never once carried a blade into those rooms, Calum. I carried the truth, arranged just so, and I let proud men break themselves upon it. That is all the Falcon ever was. A woman who understood men better than they wished to be understood." Calum lowered himself to the cold stone floor because his legs would no longer hold the weight of what he was hearing. "The duchy the maps forget," he said. "The small one at the gates. My father wept telling that one." Seraphine was quiet for a long moment. "Oraloon Reach," she said softly. The candle flame trembled. Somewhere below, the sea went on breaking against the cliffs, patient and enormous. 12 years ago," she said, "your father had been dead not 4 months, and you were a green young duke of 24 who did not yet know how to be anything at all. The Eastern Crown meant to swallow this coast. They had bought your bannermen and poisoned your granaries, and they had marked you, Calum, the last of the Thornevale line, for a quiet death that would look like fever. Your house would have ended in a single winter, and no song would have been sung for it, because Oraloon Reach is too far from anywhere for songs to reach." She looked at him steadily. "I unmade all of it. I turned their bought lords back to your side by letting each believe the others had already confessed. I emptied the poisoned stores through a merchant who never knew whose life he saved. And I sat 3 nights in the rafters of your own great hall, Calum, watching the man they had paid to put nightshade in your cup, until I could take him without waking the house. You never saw me. You were never meant to. You woke each of those mornings believing yourself merely fortunate." Calum could not speak. He was a boy again in his father's study, listening to a tale of a shadow that had saved their line, praying to be worthy of a legend that had no face. "You saved my life," he said at last, and the words came out cracked. "Before I ever knew your name. You saved this house, and I spent 12 years thanking a ghost." "I saved a great many houses," Seraphine said, "and I loved none of them. I want you to understand that. What I did for Oraloon Reach that winter, I did as the Falcon does all things, coldly and well, and for reasons of my own. I had no tenderness for the young duke asleep in his bed. He was a piece upon a board." Her voice wavered for the first time, and she pressed on before it could fail her. "But when the work was done, and Corwin was dead for the crime of losing me, and I wished to disappear from the world entirely, I found that I could not stop thinking of the small, far duchy that had cost me the most and paid me the least. And so, a year later, I came to its door." "The storm," Calum whispered, 11 years ago. The hooded woman at the servants' entrance, with blood on her cloak and no name, whom my steward would have turned into the rain, and I would not. You did not ask my name, Seraphine said. You did not ask about my crime. You gave me a dry room and a horse at dawn, and asked nothing in return. And you did not know that you were sheltering the very woman who had once sheltered you. Her hands were trembling now, and she made no effort to steal them. I told myself I had come to see whether the boy I saved had grown into a man worth saving. Strategy, I called it. The falcon does nothing without a reason. But I stayed in the winter, and then I stayed in the spring. And the reason I could never quite name myself was that I had spent my whole life reading the hearts of powerful men in order to defeat them, and I had never once met a heart I wished only to sit beside. Calum lifted his head and looked at his wife across the ruined room, and 11 years of quiet mornings rearranged themselves before his eyes into something vast and deliberate and heartbreaking. When you needed a place to hide the greatest strategist in the world, he said slowly, you did not choose Oralune Reach at random. I chose the one door in all the world, she said, that had once opened to a stranger in the rain and asked for nothing. I told the court I was a shy woman who loved her roses. I told you I had never travelled farther than Merrowhaven Harbour. I poured your tea each morning with a steady hand, and I spilled no wine, and I said nothing worth remembering, and every day for 11 years I hid the falcon from you so completely that even you, who had prayed to her memory since boyhood, never once suspected that she slept beside you every night. Her voice broke fully now. I meant to hide behind a marriage, Calum. I never once meant to fall inside one. That was the single thing in my whole life I did not plan, and it is the only thing I have never regretted. For a long while, Calum said nothing. He rose, and he crossed to the broken window, and he looked out at the black and heaving sea that had guarded her secret as faithfully as she had. He did not take her hand. That, more than any word, told her how deeply she had wounded him, for the wound was not the danger, and it was not even deceit. The wound was 11 years of mornings in which he had thought he was the one protecting her. You lied to me every single day, he said to the glass. I protected you every single day, she answered, and rose to stand behind him. There are men, Calum, who have spent more than a decade trying to put a face to the falcon, and every one of them would burn Merrowhaven to the waterline to reach me. The less you knew, the safer you were. I told myself that 1,000 mornings. I am telling it to you now, and for the first time I no longer know whether I said it to keep you safe or to keep you. He did not answer, and so they stood in silence while the storm passed itself against the coast, husband and wife, and the ghost between them, until the grey of dawn came up cold and colourless over the water, and a far worse storm arrived by carriage upon the cliff road. He came under a flag of diplomacy, a special envoy of the Eastern Crown requesting the hospitality of the Duke of Oralune Reach. His name was Emmerich Van, and when Seraphine heard it from the steward at breakfast, she set down her teacup so carefully that not a single drop was spilled, and Calum, watching her, understood at last that her stillness had never once been at peace. It had always been discipline worn so long it had learned to smile. Corwin Van taught you, Calum said when the steward had withdrawn, and now a van arrives at our gate. His younger brother, Seraphine said. Corwin is dead, though I did not kill him, whatever Emmerich has spent these 11 years believing. When I vanished, the crown demanded a price, and Corwin was the price. His own masters executed him for the crime of losing the falcon. Emmerich has hunted me from that day to this. The man in our cellar was his hound, sent ahead to be certain. Today, Emmerich comes himself, which means the hound found what it was sent to find, and Emmerich is now sure. She looked at her husband, and for the first time in 11 years, her fear was not for herself. He will sit at your table tonight and smile, and he will search me for the smallest seam, and if he finds it, Calum, he will not challenge me directly. He learned long ago that the surest way to kill the falcon is not to strike at her, but to take from her everything she has finally allowed herself to love. He will come for you first, and this house and everyone in it, and he will make me watch. Calum was quiet a long moment. The anger of the night had not left him, but beneath it watching his wife hold her terror in both hands like a bird with a broken wing. Something older and steadier woke, something that had been sleeping since a boy first heard a legend and longed to be worthy of it. "Then he will find no seam," Calum said, "because tonight there will be no falcon at my table. There will be only the dullest duke in the kingdom and his shy wife who loves her roses, and we will bore him into the sea." He met her eyes. "You saved my life once from the rafters of my own hall, and I never even knew to thank you. Permit me, madam, to be of some small use to you at last." Something moved across Seraphine's face that she could not command and did not try to. "You would help me," she said. "After all of it." "I have not decided whether I forgive you," Calum answered honestly. "That is a longer road and we will walk it. But you are my wife, and no man drinks my wine and threatens my house. Those two things I decided a very long time ago, and one of them, it seems, I decided the night I did not turn a stranger into the rain." Emmerich Van was a courteous man, which made him a great deal more dangerous than a cruel one. He arrived with gifts and gratitude, praised the winter roses of the Sky Garden terraces, and admired the glass conservatories that clung to the cliffs like frost made permanent. He was a lean man of middle years, with his brother's clever eyes, and he watched Seraphine throughout the whole of dinner with the patient attention of a man who has waited 11 years and can wait comfortably through one more supper. "They tell me the Duchess seldom speaks at court," Emmerich said, midway through the second course. "A rare quality in these loud and grasping days." "My wife prefers her roses to politics," Calum said easily. "I confess I have come to envy her the peace of it. A man hears enough scheming in a council chamber to last 3 lifetimes. "And yet," Emmerich said, turning his dark and unhurried gaze upon Seraphine, "I feel a great certainty that we have met. In another season, another country it may be, the face escapes me. But the stillness, madam, I would know the stillness anywhere. I have known only one other person in my life who could sit so quietly and yet fill a room to its corners." Calum's hand tightened upon his glass until his knuckles whitened. But Seraphine only smiled, a small and puzzled smile, the smile of a woman who has spent 11 years being underestimated and has made a quiet art of it. "I fear you flatter me, my lord," she said. "I have never in my life travelled farther than the harbour of Merrowhaven. My husband will tell you I am the poorest of travellers. The sea disagrees with me most grievously." "Grievously," Calum agreed. "We attempted a voyage to the Southern Isles in our 2nd year of marriage. We turned back within the hour, and she was pale for a week." Emmerich smiled, and the smile did not once trouble his eyes. "How very disappointing," he said softly, "that the sea should keep such a remarkable lady confined to one small shore. I have always thought it a particular cruelty when a person of rare gifts is made to spend them upon roses." And there, beneath the pleasant words, the true message passed between them, plain as a blade laid upon the linen. He knew. He had always known. The courtesies were only the bow a hunter makes to a worthy quarry before he draws the snare tight. The snare tightened before the fish course. Her servant, Calum, did not recognize entered to refill the Duke's cup, and Seraphine, who had been laughing softly at some remark of the envoy's, did not appear to move at all, and yet somehow her hand was around her husband's wrist before the wine had touched his lips, and the cup was set down untasted, and her voice was still light and warm as she said, "My love, you know the physician forbade you the strong vintages after dusk." And only Calum felt how her fingers trembled against his pulse. The strange servant bowed and withdrew, and did not return, and could not afterward be found anywhere in the house. Calum understood, with a lurch that had nothing to do with the wine, that he had come within the breadth of a lip from dying at his own table, exactly as he had been meant to die 12 years before, and that his wife had saved him a second time by the same silent art, only now he had been awake to see it. He looked at the cup. He looked at Seraphine, who had already resumed her gentle laughter for the benefit of their guest, and whose eyes, when they met his for half a heartbeat, held an apology so vast it could not be spoken across a dinner table. They did not speak of it until the household slept, and the guest had retired, And then Calum found his wife in the observatory once more, sweeping the last of the broken glass into a pan by candlelight. And he closed the door behind him harder than he meant to. "He tried to poison me at my own table," Calum said. His voice shook, and he let it. "In my own hall, as I sat there being dull for your sake." "Yes," said Seraphine, "and you stopped it the way you stopped it 12 years ago. From the rafters, from nowhere, without a sound." He set his hands on the cold windowsill and bowed his head. "How many times, Seraphine? In 11 years, how many times has my life been in your hands without my knowing it? How many mornings did I drink the tea you poured me, and never think to wonder why I was still alive to drink it?" She was quiet. "Twice more than tonight," she said at last, very low. "Nothing came of them. I did not wish you to carry the weight of knowing." He turned. And now at last, the anger he had been holding since the night before broke its banks, not the loud anger of a lesser man, but the low and terrible anger of one who has just seen the whole architecture of his life and found himself the only person in it who did not know the plan. "Did you marry me out of guilt?" he asked, "because you had once saved me and could not bear to leave the work unfinished? Am I a piece upon your board even now, Seraphine? A thing to be kept alive because you started keeping it alive 12 years ago and never learned how to stop?" His voice cracked. "Tell me the truth. You have told me every other truth in this room. Tell me whether any single morning of the last 11 years was real, or whether I have simply been the longest and most gentle assignment of the falcon's life." The pan of broken glass slipped from her hands and rang against the stone, and she did not stoop to gather it. When she looked at him, her composure was gone entirely, stripped away, and what stood before him was not the falcon, and was not the quiet Duchess, but only a woman who had defended her heart so long and so well that she had almost forgotten she still had one to defend. "Do you imagine I wanted this?" she said, and her voice was raw. "I built a life in which no one could ever reach me. No one. I had made myself into a legend precisely so that I would never again have to be a person. Because persons can be lost, Calum, and I had lost everyone I ever allowed myself to love. My mother, my father, Corwin, all of them, gone, and every one of them because the world found the seam in me." Tears stood in her eyes and did not fall, held there by long habits. "And then a young duke opened a door in a storm and asked me nothing, and I meant to use his kindness as a hiding place and nothing more, and instead I have spent 11 years terrified. Not Emmerich, not of the crowns that hunt me, terrified of you, terrified of the one small window through which the world could finally reach in and take from me the single thing I never planned to want." She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. "You ask whether it was real. Calum, you are the only real thing I have ever permitted myself. The falcon was the mask. Seraphine is the woman, and she has loved you so long and so quietly that she does not know how to say it out loud, because saying it out loud is the most dangerous thing she has ever done, and she is doing it now, and she is so afraid." The broken glass lay glittering between them on the floor. Outside, the sea kept its patient counsel. Calum crossed the room. He did not embrace her, not yet, for too much stood unresolved for so easy a mercy. But he took her hand, the same steady hand that had held a pistol, and stopped a poisoned cup, and poured his tea for 11 years, and he held it, and that was enough for one night. "Then let us keep the window shut," he said quietly. "Together this time. You have carried this house on your back for 12 years and never let me lift a single stone of it. That ends now. Tell me how we destroy Emmerich Van and stop protecting me from my own life, because I am done being the only man in Oraloon Reach who does not know what is happening in it." For a long moment, she only looked at him. And then, slowly, she began to speak, and as she spoke, Calum understood that he had married the most dangerous mind on the continent, and that all these years that mind had been arranging his teacup each morning with the same terrible precision it had once used to arrange the fall of kings. "Emmerich did not come alone," she said, "and he did not come without proof, because a man of his caution never carries his vengeance in his head where it might be forgotten. He carries it in a ledger. There is always a ledger, Calum, 11 years of his hunt. Every coin spent, every bribe paid, every border crossed in secret, every crown he sold his own sovereign's secrets to in order to fund a chase his masters never sanctioned. Her eyes sharpened, and for the first time Calum watched the falcon and his wife become before him the same woman. He believes that Ledger is his blade against me. It is, in truth, the rope about his own throat. He has been so consumed with proving what I am that he has entirely forgotten to hide what he has become. A spy master who spends a decade and a fortune upon a private grief and pays for it by betraying the very throne he serves is not a hunter, Calum. He is a traitor. And traitors are the one quarry I have never failed to bring down, because their ruin is already written. I need only carry it to the right eye before he can carry it to yours. His own crown, Calum breathed. His own crown, Seraphine agreed. He will move tomorrow in your great hall before your minor lords, and he will name the falcon there and let your own people bay for my head so that his hands stay clean. He turns my strength against me, exactly as I taught him, because I taught them both, and Emmerich was always the more gifted student and the crueler one. So we must reach his king before he reaches your court. We must lay his ledger open before the eyes that will hang him for it, and we must do it by dawn. And how, Calum asked, does one reach a king across the sea by dawn? Seraphine almost smiled, and for a moment the exhaustion lifted from her face, and something fierce and beautiful and 11 years hidden shone through. One does not, she said, unless one has been quietly keeping the fastest cutter in Merrowhaven harbour provisioned and ready for 11 years, and unless one's lady's maid was once the sharpest courier in 3 kingdoms, and unless the falcon, being a cautious creature, obtained a copy of that ledger from Emmerich's own household the moment she heard a van had landed on her shore. She reached into the grey cloak that still hung upon the crate and drew out a slim packet bound in oilcloth. I told you. I have had a single day to be afraid. I do not waste a day, Calum. I never have. They did not sleep at all. By the grey before dawn, a message had left Merrowhaven aboard that waiting cutter, borne by a lady's maid named Agnes, who had served the Duchess faithfully for 9 years, and who, it transpired, had once carried the fate of nations sewn into the hem of her skirts. And within the walls of the Reach, Seraphine began quietly and without once raising her voice to close the trap she had been building since the moment a name was spoken at her gate. But Emmerich Van was no fool, and grief had made him swift. At noon he requested an audience in the great hall before the assembled household and the minor lords of the Reach, and he brought with him a bound and frightened man and a sheaf of sealed papers, and he asked the Duke of Orelune Reach, with every courtesy, for justice. Your Grace, he said, and his voice carried cleanly to every cold corner of the stone hall, I have travelled far in the service of my crown, and grief has been my only companion upon the road. For more than 11 years, I have sought the murderer of my brother, a creature known across the whole of the continent by a single name, whispered in every court and feared in every camp, the starlit falcon. He let the name settle over the assembly, and Calum watched the minor lords lean forward as one, hungry for the legend the way men are always hungry for a legend they may safely watch destroyed. I have proof at last that this destroyer of houses has hidden these long years in plain sight, sheltered by a nobility too gentle to know the serpent it warms at its own hearth. And with your leave, your Grace, before all these honest witnesses, I shall name the falcon here in this hall upon this very hour. The great hall fell so silent that the sea could be heard through the stone. Seraphine sat at Calum's right hand, still as a painted saint upon a chapel wall, her expression one of polite and faintly bewildered interest, as though the matter concerned some distant country and not the whole of her life. And Calum, looking once upon the woman who had saved his house from the rafters and his life from a poisoned cup, felt the last of his anger burn cleanly away, leaving behind only the boy who had prayed to be worthy of a legend, grown at last into a man who could stand between the legend and the world. Calum Thornevale rose. You will not, the Duke said. Emmerich's composure flickered like a candle in a draught. Your Grace? You will not name the falcon in my hall, Calum went on, and his voice was mild, and it filled the room to its farthest corner. "Because I find, my lord, that I am a great deal more curious about another matter entirely, and as this is my hall, my curiosity comes before your grief." He raised one hand. The doors at the rear of the hall opened, and 2 of the household guards came forward, and between them walked Agnes, returned upon the noontide with the salt still in her hair, and she carried a plain iron box. "You have spoken to us of proof, my lord. It happens that I too have lately come into proof. It reached me only this morning from certain friends of this house in the Eastern Courts. Friends who were most gravely alarmed to learn what one of their own spy masters has been about these 11 years past, and who sailed the moment they understood." The color drained from Emmerich Van's face like wine from a cracked cup. "A ledger," Calum said. He opened the iron box and lifted the bound papers so that the minor lords might see the seals upon them. The seals of Emmerich's own government, already broken, already read, already answered. Every coin, my lord. Every bribe, every secret of your own sovereign that you sold to foreign crowns to fund a private and unsanctioned vengeance. You called yourself a hunter. Your king, I fear, will use a shorter word. He let the silence stretch. His envoy waits at this moment in Marrowhaven Harbour. He does not wait patiently. He is most eager to discuss accounting. The bound man that Emmerich had brought as his witness looked from the spymaster to the ledger and back again, and understood in an instant that he had staked his neck upon the losing side, and cried out loudly and quickly that he had never in his life known the Falcon, that this man had paid him in foreign coin to speak lies before a duke, that he was an honest servant most wickedly led astray. The hall erupted, and through the roar of it, Emmerich Van looked past the shouting lords and the drawn guards, across the whole length of the great stone hall, directly at Seraphine, who had not moved, and who watched him now with an expression of such gentle sorrow that it silenced him more completely than any accusation. "You," he said. It was not a charge. It was almost a wonder. "You did all of this in a single day." Seraphine rose from her seat, and for the first time in 11 years she permitted a court to see the whole of her, the straightness of her spine, the level calm of her regard, the stillness that had never once been shyness, but was, and had always been, the perfect patience of a hawk upon a high wind. She crossed the length of the hall while the lords fell quiet before her without knowing why, and she stopped before Emmerich Van, and she spoke so softly that only he could hear. "I did nothing," she murmured. "You spent 11 years weaving the rope. I only carried it to the men who wished to hang you. That was always my art, Emmerich. I have never in my life destroyed a single soul. I merely arranged the truth just so, and let proud men break themselves upon it. You know this. Corwin taught us both, in a cold room in a border town, and he would grieve to see what you have made of yourself chasing a woman who never once wished him dead." Her voice gentled further, into something almost tender. "Let it end here. Sail home. Answer for your ledger. Live, Emmerich. It is more of a door than the world ever left open for me, and I am giving it to you freely, with my own hand." Whatever Emmerich Van saw in her face at that moment, it was not the monster he had crossed a decade and a continent to destroy. It was a weary woman who, even now, even with his ruin closed in her fist, was leaving him a door through which to walk out alive. He looked at her for a long moment, and something in him that had been rigid for 11 years seemed at last to bend, and he lowered his eyes, and he said nothing at all. He was taken from the hall by his own king's guard before the sun touched the water. He did not speak again, and he did not once look back, and Seraphine watched from the high window of the observatory long after, until his ship was only a single lantern upon the darkening sea, and then only the memory of a lantern, and then nothing but the constellations coming out cold and bright above the endless water of Marrowhaven. Calum came and stood beside her at the broken window that no one had yet found the heart to mend. The winter roses of the Sky Garden terraces glowed pale below them in the last of the light. "You could have run," he said quietly. "Any night these 11 years, you could have vanished the way the Falcon always vanished, and left me none the wiser, and been safe. Why did you stay, Seraphine? Truly, not the strategy, The truth. She was silent for a long while. When she answered, she did not look at him, but she reached out and laid her hand upon the cold stone of the sill, and after a moment he laid his own beside it. "Because a boy of 24 once opened a door in a storm," she said, "and did not ask my name, and did not ask my crime, and gave a bleeding stranger a dry room and a horse at dawn, and asked for nothing in return. I never saw his face clearly that night. I never learned that the young duke I had saved from the rafters a year before and the young duke who sheltered me in the rain were the same man, not until I had already come to his door on purpose and could no longer tell where the strategy ended and the wanting began. At last she turned to him. I have kept the falcon hidden from you for 11 years, Calum. But Seraphine was never hidden. Seraphine has been yours since the night you did not turn her away, and she was, though neither of us knew it, yours a year before that, from a rafter above your bed, watching over a boy she had already decided the world would not be permitted to take." For a long moment, Calum did not move. Then he lifted his hand from the cold stone and took his wife's face in both of his own, and he looked at her as though for the very first time. Not the quiet Duchess of the banquets, not the shadow of the border wars, not even the legend of his own boyhood prayers, but the woman who had crossed a continent and a decade, and the whole of her own carefully guarded heart, to return to a single act of kindness in the rain. "I have spent my life," he said, "loving a legend that had no face, and then loving a wife I believed I understood. And I was wrong about both, because they were the same woman all along, and she is far more than either. I do not want the falcon, Seraphine. I do not want the quiet Duchess. I want the woman who dropped a pan of broken glass in this room and told me she was afraid. I would like to spend the rest of my years learning who she truly is." "That," said Seraphine, and at last she smiled the smile she had never once given a court or a king, "will take you a great deal longer than 11 years, Your Grace. I am not an easy legend to read." "Good," said the Duke of Orelune Reach, and he kissed his wife beneath the wheeling stars, while the winter roses glowed below them and the sea kept every one of its old secrets. "I am in no hurry at all. I have waited 12 years already to thank you. I find I can wait a lifetime to get to know you." 3 winters later, the observatory was no longer locked, and the great window had long since been mended, and the broken telescope had been made whole and polished until it caught the morning like a struck bell. On a bright and bitter day near the turning of the year, Calum Thornevale sat upon the observatory floor with his back against the wall, and upon his knee sat a small girl, not yet 2 years old, with her mother's grey eyes and her father's stubborn chin. Star charts lay spread across the stone around them, though the child could not read a single mark upon them and did not try. She reached instead for the sunlight where it fell across the brass of the telescope, and laughed aloud when it slipped through her small fingers, and reached again, and laughed again, delighted beyond all reason by a light she could not hope to hold. "Elawan," Calum murmured against her dark curls, "you are your mother's daughter entirely, chasing what will not be caught, and merry about it every time." Seraphine stood at the tall and unbroken window with a letter in her hand. It bore the seal of a distant crown, and it asked, with great courtesy and greater desperation, whether the falcon might be persuaded, only this once, to lend her counsel to a war that threatened to swallow a whole coast. Kings still wrote such letters. They always would, so long as she drew breath, for legends do not retire so much as consent to sleep. She read it twice. Then she folded it, and she looked at her husband upon the floor with their laughing daughter, and at the pale winter roses beyond the glass, and at the lantern boats already drifting out across the silver harbour of Merrowhaven in the gathering dusk. "Will you go?" Calum asked. He did not fear the answer any longer. That was the difference the 3 winters had made in him. He knew now that whatever she chose, she would choose it beside him and not around him, and that no morning of their life together was an assignment, and that the tea she still poured him each dawn with her steady hand was the truest thing either of them had ever done. Seraphine crossed the room and sank down onto the floor beside them, and Elowen at once abandoned the untouchable sunlight and reached instead for her mother, who gathered the child close against her. "I will write them an answer," Seraphine said, "and I shall not need to leave this room to end their war. That was always the finest kind of victory, Calum. The kind that costs no one their blood, and least of all the woman who wins it. She rested her head against her husband's shoulder, and the last light moved across the three of them and the charts and the polished brass. But I am not the falcon tonight. Tonight I am only a woman on the floor, watching her daughter chase the light beside the man who once opened his door to a stranger in the rain and never knew that he was letting the whole of his life walk in out of the cold. Above the cliffs of Oraloon Reach, the first stars came out, the same stars a grandfather had loved more than the living, and a father now loved for the sake of the living, and a daughter would one day learn to name. The sea went on keeping its secrets, and in a lamplit room high above the harbour, three lives that the world would never fully know sat close together in the dark and the warmth, and needed no legend between them at all. If this tale of hidden hearts has stayed with you, linger a little longer here by the sea, for Merrowhaven keeps more secrets yet, and not all of them have finished being told.